And now we are going to have, yes, he was just about to introduce you. The floor is yours, sir.
Sorry that there was some technical problem in unmuting the system. I hope I can share my screen. Is it okay?
Tabii. Ekranın altında
of course. Yeah, share screen.
Ekranın altında.
So at the bottom of the page, sir, you're going to see share screen. Yes.
Evet.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chair, Brigadier General Adnan Tandiverdi Pasha, the President of Assam, my old friend Dr. Yaqub Bulat, Colonel Ersan, and the organizers, thank you very much for providing me the opportunity to share my thoughts on the eve of the 4th International Assam Islamic Union. I shall be speaking in the broader context of examining the world defense alliances, and in particular, I will focus on NATO as a political and defense alliance. May I continue?
Buyurun.
Of course, the floor is yours, sir. Please go ahead.
Buyurun.
Ladies and gentlemen, NATO is generally considered a military alliance, but in reality, it is far more than that. It is essentially a political alliance made for the political objectives, which is assisted with the military means. Some speakers, including Dr. Shala Yusuf and Mr. Assam, have already spoken about the NATO, and they have spoken about the collective defense concept as well. So the NATO was established in 1949 based on the collective defense concept to counter the military threat from the Soviet Union, where the Soviet Union forces were deployed in the Eastern Europe after the Second World War. It was primarily created under the North Atlantic Treaty, which is called Washington Treaty as well. The NATO initially had only 12 members. Later on, there were 2 or 3 expansions. In the first expansion from 1952 to 1988, 4 countries had joined, which included Greece and Turkey as well. And in 1990, the Germany was granted the membership, which was already held by the West Germany. During the period after the Cold War, from 1999 to 2020, 14 other countries also joined, making the membership of NATO to 30 at the moment. France withdrew from the Integrated Military Command in 1966, but later on joined in 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental concept, as I already mentioned, is that of a collective defense, which means that an armed attack against one or more of them in the Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against all of them. Therefore, all countries will be asked to provide the resources so that the country which has been attacked can be defended. The basic geographic scope of the NATO, as initially it was conceived for the Europe, or for that matter at that time Western Europe, and later on the complete Europe and the North America. Now this is something very important, because over a period of time the NATO has transformed from a collective defense organization designed and mandated for a particular region to a global arena. So that's important, which one we must discuss and we must understand. NATO, as I said, is a political organization with a military cooperation and with the military operation. There were two main political objectives, that was strengthening of the domestic democratic institutions and to invite other European states to join the organization. It is very interesting to note that the expansion of the NATO and expansion of the European Union has been taking place almost simultaneously, side by side. As far as the NATO organization is concerned, the highest body is the North Atlantic Council, which is a political decision-making body. It is chaired by the Secretary General, and each member state is represented at the ambassadorial level. There are two planning committees, which is the Defense Planning Committee and the Nuclear Planning Committee. In the military committees, military representatives, they represent their chiefs of military staffs, and then there are two commands, and then there is, in addition, Canada-US Regional Planning Group as well. I will quickly go through some of the slides so that I can focus on the main issues. The NATO is a formidable political and military alliance. Why I'm emphasizing on this issue is that no defense alliance can work or can be established without the political unity. So this is extremely important for the concept of the Islamic unity as well. The aim was to unify, consolidate, and strengthen military powers of the Western allies to ensure the political stability in Western Europe, and the numerical superiority and the preponderance of the Warsaw Pact was to be countered by the deployment of nuclear weapon, which was done by the United States in Western Europe. After the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, there was a very big question: what should be done with the NATO and what should be the future of the NATO? In 1985, as you all know, that there was a lot of reforms introduced by Gorbachev, which resulted into dissolution of the Warsaw Pact and into the disintegration of the Soviet Russia. In March 1991, when the Soviet Union decided to dissolve the Warsaw Pact, a major question arose: should NATO continue to exist? And if so, then what should be the NATO's mandate? A new mandate was adopted, and that was maintaining international peace and security. Excuse me. The new mandate had two objectives: to promote cooperation with former Warsaw Pact countries and to participate in the conflict management and conflict resolution in Europe. The North Atlantic Cooperation Council was established in 1991, and a partnership for peace, where Turkey is also a member of this program, was established in 1994. It was aimed for standardized military training of the NATO states. Those of you who had attended the last ASSAM Congress might remember that I had spoken on the standardization of the and on the principles and the procedure of establishing a standardized military training institution for the Islamic Union. Non-NATO members were also invited. That included Russia and Ukraine. NATO's transformed role in the post-Cold War era is extremely important because the organization was initially mandated for defensive purposes only, the collective defense of Europe and North America. However, when the conflict management and conflict resolution was included in the Europe, the NATO forces were deployed in Balkan, and NATO forces airstrike was a major operation in Bosnia and Serbia against the Serb positions. In 1995, following the Dayton Accord, the NATO implementation force was deployed later on, which was transformed into NATO stabilization, commonly known as S4, which stayed there till 2004. In March 1999, NATO carried out massive airstrikes for 78 days in Kosovo, and later on there was a Kosovo force deployed comprising of 5 nations. Till today, these forces are there. Despite having 20 years lapsed, the Kosovo future has not yet been decided. In fact, there is a military occupation of Kosovo by NATO. There is a symbolic representation of Russian forces as well, which was done under the United Nations Resolution 1244. I shall speak few words about the prospects of the European defense independent of NATO. The reduction, there is a lot of discussions going on, and security experts have been talking of reducing the reliance on the United States, and simultaneously it would ensure more sovereignty and the ability to make independent decisions. Of course, there are certain difficulties in it. The force deployment in Europe and its periphery for the crisis management. Austria, Germany, and France, they are more interested in such European structure. The idea has been temporarily dropped because of the military capabilities and financial resources. Now, the NATO has assumed a global role, which is a very big transformation from collective defense organization to a cooperative security organization. In 2 terms. One, of course, the expansion has taken place from 12 members to 30. Second, the security policy revision. That's a greater role for global security arena. After September 11, 2001, NATO has adopted a different role altogether in support of the United Nations forces. It was the United Nations which invaded Afghanistan after these the attacks on the pretext of self-defense, which is allowed under the United Nations Charter, Article 51. And this invasion of the Afghanistan opened a new opportunity for the NATO to be deployed outside Europe. Prior to this, they had been deployed within Europe in Balkans only. Sorry. In Afghanistan, the NATO forces were deployed in 2003 and they were withdrawn in 2004, 2014 and 2015, but there are about 12,000 troops which are still there. NATO also has used its forces either in support of the US invasion of other different countries like Iraq, Libya, and Syria, and number of African countries as well. The more active participants are British, French, and Italian military forces, mostly in Middle East and in North Africa. Now, there are some very fundamental strategic and academic questions. Number one, is it a coincidence or manifestation of a deliberate strategic policy that in the last 2 decades, all military adventures, invasions, and occupation by the US and NATO forces have happened in the Muslim world? Second, why any political resurgence in the erstwhile colonies, be in Africa, be in Asia, especially in the Muslim countries, is considered as a global political threat by the West and the existing world order? Third, has the narrative of the global terrorism and counterterrorism been used to legitimize the US and NATO military operations for invading Muslim countries and developing world and grabbing the natural resources? A few words on our NATO and US relations. Lately, in the last few decades, there has been tensions because the US has dominated NATO politically and militarily. European countries have expressed their concern on such arrangement. The US is a major contributor, and lately, very lately, in the last 4 years, during the President Trump's tenure, the US leadership has, the leadership role of the US has considerably eroded. President Trump had demanded that the European countries should share more financial burden and provide more military forces. President Biden probably is expected to maintain better relations with NATO members. Just to conclude, the NATO has transformed. The deployment of a large conventional forces was done in the Western European soil, but post-Cold War, NATO has readjusted its mandate, including cooperative security, and has operated far beyond its geographical initial mandate. The military operations have been criticized on this expanded military outreach by a number of scholars, the former security experts within the NATO countries as well. But what is important is that NATO's role has been adjusted to respond to the important global political development. I will focus on few lessons learned. Political and military alliances, they need to be dynamic, and strong political will is required. If the Islamic Union, if the Islamic Union plans to have the defense cooperation, then the political will and the political leadership is mandatory. Strong leadership inspires motivation. There has to be core states. In NATO, there are few core states. They decide the policies. Consensus building is extremely important. Cooperation of all members is required. And then the concept of the comprehensive, comprehensive cooperation is extremely important, which is political, diplomatic, military, economic, commerce and trade, and the shared philosophy. The Muslim world needs to have crisis management arrangement, conflict management and conflict resolution, counter sectarian and ethnic threats, protection against the foreign invasions, higher education and science and technology, and moreover, enhance the cooperation comprehensively in political, diplomatic, defense, security, and economic domains. Only then the Islamic unity and Islamic solidarity can be achieved. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. If there are any questions and if time is available for the Q&A, I will be available.
Teşekkür ederim sunumunuz için.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and you stuck with the time. You used the time effectively. Thank you very much.